Most people will tell you that fathers don't get enough credit. They say it and they mean it, in the way people mean things that are true but not yet personal. And then a man like Gregory Allen walks into the room. And the statement stops being a sentiment and becomes something you feel in your chest. Gregory Allen was 51 years old. He had raised his daughter alone from the time she was 4 days old. Not 4 years, not 4 months. 4 days, the age she was when her mother left the hospital and did not come back. He had taken that infant home in a car seat that he had practiced buckling and unbuckling for 2 weeks before the birth. And he had walked into an apartment that was suddenly the most important place on earth. And he had figured it out. Every single day, for 22 years, he had figured it out. He did not know, when he walked onto the Family Feud stage on a Thursday afternoon in September, that his daughter had spent the past 3 months arranging something, that she had made phone calls and written emails and coordinated with people across 2 states to prepare a revelation that her father had no idea was coming. He did not know that Steve Harvey was holding that revelation in his jacket pocket. And when Steve told him what it was, standing on that stage, in front of a live studio audience, looking Gregory Allen in the eyes, a man who had spent 22 years being unshakable sat down on the edge of the stage and covered his face and wept, not from sorrow, from something that has no simpler name than final. Gregory Marcus Allen was born in 1973 in Savannah, Georgia, the second of 3 children raised by a mother who worked as a home health aide and a father who drove long-haul freight. They were not a wealthy family, but they were a structured one, a household where expectations were clear, effort was honored, and love was expressed through the daily work of showing up. Gregory absorbed that ethic so completely that by the time he was an adult, it was no longer something he practiced. It was simply what he was. He worked in logistics warehouse management, then operations, then regional oversight for a mid-sized distribution company in Columbia, South Carolina. He was methodical, reliable, the kind of man whose team always knew where things stood. He had been with the same company for 19 years. His colleagues described him, without exception, as someone who did not make problems, and did not leave them, either. He had met Vanessa in 2000 at a mutual friend's birthday gathering. She was bright and restless and funny in a way that caught him by surprise, because Gregory was not a man who was often caught by surprise. They dated for 2 years. She became pregnant. They were not yet married, but they were, Gregory believed, moving steadily in that direction. What happened after the birth was not something Gregory talked about in terms of blame, because he was not a man given to blame. What he said, in the rare moments he addressed it at all, was that Vanessa was not ready, that she had looked at the child and then looked at him with an expression he did not have a word for, and that 3 days later she was gone. She left a note. The note said she was sorry, and that she knew he would be a good father. She was right about the second thing. KYRA Simone Allen came home from Palmetto Health Hospital on a Tuesday. She was 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with her father's nose and an opinion about being put down that she made audible and immediate. Gregory's mother flew in from Savannah for the first 2 weeks. His sister drove down on weekends for the first month. After that, it was Gregory and a network of neighbors, daycare providers, and colleagues who covered gaps with the particular generosity that people extend to a man doing something they recognize as extraordinary even when the man himself does not. Gregory did not think of what he was doing as extraordinary. He thought of it as hija. There was a child who needed feeding, bathing, comforting, educating, transporting, encouraging, disciplining, and eventually releasing into the world as a person capable of her own life. He approached each stage the way he approached logistics problems, systematically, without drama, adjusting the plan when the plan needed adjusting. He read parenting books. He attended school meetings. He learned to braid hair from a YouTube tutorial at 11:30 on a Sunday night because Kaiwaire had decided she wanted braids for picture day, and picture day was tomorrow. Kyra grew up knowing her mother had left. Gregory had never lied about it and never elaborated beyond what the question being asked required. When she was 5 and asked where her mommy was, he said her mommy had needed to go away and that it was not because of anything Kyra had done. When she was 10 and asked if her mommy would ever come back, he said he did not know and that the more important question was what kind of life Kyra wanted to build for herself. Right here, when she was 16 and asked, with the precision of a teenager who has been quietly assembling the pieces for years, whether her mother had ever tried to contact them, Gregory told her the truth twice in the early years. Letters that he had kept in a shoebox on the top shelf of his closet, because they belonged to Kyra and it was Kyra's decision what to do with them. Kyra had taken the shoebox, gone to her room, and come back 2 hours later to watch television with her father as though nothing had happened. She never mentioned the letters directly again, but something shifted in her after that evening. Not toward bitterness, which Gregory had quietly feared, but toward a kind of settled clarity. She knew what her family was. She knew what she had been given and by whom. And she knew, at 16, what she intended to do about it when the time came. She was 22 now, a graduate student in social work at the University of South Carolina, studying child welfare and family preservation with the focused intentionality of someone who has chosen their field for reasons that are entirely personal and entirely serious. She was the one who had submitted the Family Feud application 8 months earlier. She was the one who had made the phone calls. She was the one who, 3 months before the taping, had quietly begun a search that she had been preparing herself to undertake since she was 16 years old. She had found what she was looking for, and she had asked the show to help her give it to her father. The Allen family arrived at the studio on a Thursday morning in September. Kyra, Gregory's younger sister, Denise's husband, Warren, and Gregory's 20-year-old nephew, Jordan, who had been raised in part by Gregory during a difficult stretch of Denise's life and who considered his uncle the standard by which he measured most things. They were a compact, high-functioning unit. They moved through the green room with the ease of a family that has spent a lot of time together and knows how each person operates under pressure. Gregory was in good spirits, relaxed, dry-humored, mildly competitive in the way men become when they are put in a room with other men and told there will be a score. He had prepared. Of course he had prepared. He had made Kyra run practice questions with him for 3 weeks at the kitchen table, and she had done it without complaint and with only occasional eye-rolling, which Gregory took as a sign of deep filial affection. He had noticed, in the weeks leading up to the taping, that Kyra seemed to be carrying something, not distress, nothing that worried him more, a kind of careful containment, the look of a person who is holding a plan together by not looking directly at it. He had filed the observation away in the manner he filed most things. Acknowledged, noted, not yet actionable. The opposing family, the Henderson family from Atlanta, were warm and funny and immediately likable. The game began with the usual Family Feud energy. Rapid answers, collective groans at missed points, Steve Harvey's commentary threading through everything like a master conductor. Gregory was sharp at the podium. Kyra, when it was her turn, was sharper. Jordan hit a #1 answer that sent the audience into real noise. The Allens built a lead. Steve Harvey, working the room between rounds, arrived at the Allen family with a quality of attention that Gregory, being an attentive man himself, noticed without yet knowing what to make of. Steve asked about Savannah, about the logistics work, about the team standing around the podium. He was warm in the way he was always warm, but there was a deliberateness to it. Then Steve looked at Gregory and said, "Tell me about raising Kyra." Gregory glanced at his daughter, a reflex, the check-in of a parent who has spent 22 years reading his child's face, and then looked back at Steve. "What do you want to know?" "Start from the beginning," Steve said. Gregory told it the way he always told it when asked, briefly, without self-pity, framing it as a sequence of practical decisions rather than a sustained act of devotion, because that was genuinely how he experienced it. He talked about the car seat. He talked about the YouTube tutorial for the braids. He got a laugh from the audience on that one and accepted it with quiet satisfaction. "4 days old," Steve said, when Gregory had finished. "You brought her home when she was 4 days old and you figured it out." "You don't really have a choice," Gregory said. "She needed things done, so I did them." "That's the most understated description of heroism I have ever heard on this stage," Steve said. The audience applauded. Gregory looked briefly uncomfortable in the way men look when they are being publicly recognized for something they have reclassified in their own minds as ordinary. Kyra, beside him, was looking at the floor. Her jaw was tight. Steve let the applause settle. Then he said, "Gregory, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be honest with me. In 22 years of doing this, the school runs, the braids, the homework, the hard conversations, all of it, was there ever a moment where you felt like it wasn't enough? Like Kyra was missing something you couldn't give her?" The room went very quiet. Gregory was still for a moment. He was not a man who spoke before he was ready, and nobody rushed him. When he answered, his voice was level, but the levelness was doing work. "There were moments," he said, "when she was going through things that I thought a mother might navigate better. When she had questions I could answer factually but couldn't answer from experience." He paused. I always wondered if I left a gap, if there was something she needed that I just couldn't reach. He stopped. The studio was completely silent. Beside him, Kyra had lifted her face. Her eyes were full. She was looking at her father with an expression that the cameras caught from two angles, and that every producer in the booth later said was the moment they knew this segment was something different. Steve Harvey reached into his jacket pocket. He removed a single folded sheet of paper and held it without opening it. He looked at Gregory. Your daughter has something she wants you to know, he said. She asked me to be the one to tell you, because she said, and I'm quoting her directly here, that if she tried to say it herself, she would not get through the first sentence. He glanced at Kai Ray, who gave a small, tearful nod. Then he looked back at Gregory. For the past 3 months, KYRA has been conducting a search. She found what she was looking for 6 weeks ago. She has been holding this since then, waiting for today. Steve opened the paper. He looked at it briefly. Then he looked up at Gregory with the directness of a man who is about tea. Oh, say something that matters. 14 women in South Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee, Steve said, who were raised either entirely or significantly by a single father, came forward when Ray put out a call through her university's social work network. 14 women, Gregory. And every one of them, every single one, wrote a letter describing what their father had given them. Ray collected those letters. She had them bound, and she has written one of her own. He held up the folded page. This is Ray's letter. She wants me to read the first paragraph. Just the first paragraph, she said, because the rest is yours. Gregory looked at his daughter. Ray was crying openly now. She reached over and took his hand. Steve Harvey read, Dad, I used to think about what I was missing. I don't anymore, because I understand now. From studying it, from talking to women who grew up the way I grew up, from looking at my own life and what's in it, that what I had was not a half version of a family. It was a complete one. You were not filling in for someone else. You were exactly who I needed. There is no gap. There has never been a gap. There is only you and everything you gave me, and who I became because of it. Gregory Allen sat down on the edge of the stage, not because his legs failed him, because the thing that had been held in tension for 22 years, the quiet, private fear that he had left a gap, that he had not been enough, that the one thing he could not provide had cost his daughter something irretrievable, released all at once. And the weight of that release required sitting down. He covered his face with both hands. His shoulders moved. Ray sat beside him immediately, her arm around his back, her head tilted toward his, and she held him the way daughters hold fathers when the roles have inverted, and the child becomes, briefly, the one doing the steady act. The studio audience was on its feet, not in the explosive, startled way of a sudden reveal, in the slow, unanimous way of people rising because sitting no longer feels adequate to the moment. Steve Harvey stood to the side of the stage with his hands clasped and his head bowed and gave the moment everything it required, which was space and silence and no commentary at all. After a long moment, Gregory lowered his hands. His face was wet. He looked at KYRA beside him with the expression of a man who has raised someone for 22 years and is, in this particular instance, seeing them entirely for the first time. You did all of that, he said. His voice was rough. You organized all of that? I've been planning it for a while, KYRA said. How long? She considered. Since I was about 16 and read those letters in my room, I just needed time to figure out how to say what I wanted to say. She paused. And I needed 14 other women to help me say it, because I didn't think you'd believe just me. Gregory laughed, sudden and genuine, the laugh of a man caught off guard by his own daughter's precision. That is very much your mother's strategic thinking, he said, and then his face shifted slightly at the word. And Kaiwaire's did too. Not with pain, but with the particular complexity of a topic that has been handled carefully for 22 years and does not need to be expanded upon right now. Steve Harvey stepped forward. He sat down in a chair that had been placed at the edge of the stage, a quiet detail that signaled this conversation was not over, and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees in the posture of a man who is not performing attentiveness, but feeling it. Gregory, I want to ask you something. When Ray was growing up in the hard moments, the moments of doubt, where did you find the resolve to keep going? Gregory thought about it. My mother, he said. The way she ran our house. My father, the way he came home tired and still showed up. I had a picture of what it meant to be a parent, and I held on to that picture, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Easy is easy. Hard is when the picture matters. Steve let that sit. Then he turned to address the cameras with the directness he had been building toward since the beginning of the segment. I want to say something to every father watching this right now. Every father who is doing it alone, or doing it without acknowledgement, or doing it while wondering whether it is enough. I want you to hear what Kaiwara Allen just said, because she said it as a researcher and a daughter and a woman who has looked at the evidence from every angle. There is no gap. You are not filling in for someone else. You are exactly who your child needs. The doubt you carry is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of how much you care. And caring that much every single day is what fatherhood actually is. He stood. He extended his hand to Gregory, who took it and stood as well. Steve held the handshake for a moment longer than a handshake requires. "Sir," Steve said quietly, "thank you for letting us be here for this." Gregory Allen, a man who did not make speeches, said the only thing that was true. "Thank my daughter. She's the one who did the work." The episode aired 6 weeks later. The clip of Steve Harvey reading KYRA's letter, and in particular the line, "You were not filling in for someone else. You were exactly who I needed," became one of the most widely shared pieces of television content that year. It appeared in Father's Day posts, in parenting forums, in hospital waiting rooms on shared screens. Veterans groups shared it, single father networks shared it, social workers shared it with colleagues and clients alike. KYRA's university department received over 300 emails in the week following the broadcast, from people describing their own experiences of single-parent households. The majority from adult children, writing about fathers, a demographic whose stories, as Kyra had noted in her own research, are systematically underrepresented in the literature on single-parent family outcomes. She began cataloging the responses with her thesis supervisor's guidance. What had begun as a personal act of love for her father was becoming, quietly and without design, the foundation of her graduate research. The bound volume of 14 letters, the one Steve Harvey had held on the stage, sat on Gregory Allen's kitchen table for 3 days after the taping, before he could bring himself to open it. When he did, he read it in one sitting at midnight. With a glass of water he forgot to drink. He called his mother in Savannah when he finished, at 1 in the morning, and she answered on the second ring because she had been awake. "How is it?" she asked. "I don't have the words for it," he said. "Then don't use words," she said. "Just sit with it for a while." He did. He sat on his back steps until 3 in the morning with the bound volume in his lap and the September night around him and 22 years of careful, daily, unremarkable devotion settling into a shape he had not previously been able to see from the inside. His mother was right. As she tended to be, some things do not resolve into language. They resolve into stillness. The show's follow-up segment aired 4 months after the original episode. In January, Steve Harvey introduced it by saying, "We checked in with a father and daughter from Columbia, South Carolina. What they told us is worth 5 minutes of anyone's time." The footage showed Gregory and KYRA at the kitchen table, the same table where he had drilled practice questions with her for 3 weeks and where, years before that, he had helped with homework and signed permission slips and made every school night dinner for 18 years. KYRA was talking about her research. Gregory was listening with the focused attention he brought to everything that mattered, which was most things. The table between them was covered with papers and 2 coffee cups, and the particular comfortable disorder of a home where a great deal of real work gets done. In the segment, KYRA described what the research was showing: that children raised by single fathers demonstrated outcomes across education, emotional regulation, and relationship stability that were statistically comparable to those raised in two-parent households, and that the primary variable in those outcomes was not the presence or absence of a second parent, but the consistency and intentionality of the parent who was there. She said this in the measured language of a graduate student, and then she looked at her father and said, "Which is just a complicated way of saying that you were enough. I always wanted to find a way to prove it." Gregory said, "You didn't have to prove it." "I know," she said, "but you needed to hear it, and I needed to say it properly." Steve Harvey narrated over the final footage of the segment. Gregory Allen raised his daughter alone for 22 years, and spent most of those years quietly worried he had left a gap. His daughter spent 6 years quietly assembling the evidence that no gap existed. That is a story about fatherhood, but it is also a story about what children do with the love they are given, how they carry it, and study it, and eventually find a way to give it back. KYRA completed her graduate degree the following spring. Her thesis, a qualitative study of adult outcomes in single-father households, drawing on the testimonies she had begun collecting for her father's letter project, was cited in a family policy brief submitted to the South Carolina Department of Social Services 8 months after publication. She is now working toward her doctorate. Her focus, her supervisor noted in a letter of recommendation, is distinguished not only by its intellectual rigor but by the quality of attention she brings to the families she studies, an attentiveness that is evidently constitutional, learned young, and entirely her own. Gregory Allen still works in logistics in Columbia. He still lives in the same apartment, the one he walked into with a 4-day-old in a car seat in 2002. He has thought about moving, and he will probably get around to it. But there is nothing wrong with the apartment, and he is not a man who changes things that do not need changing. The bound volume of 14 letters is on the bookshelf in the living room, between a photograph of KYR's college graduation and one of his parents, taken in Savannah in 1979. Father's Day last year, KYR drove down from Columbia and they had dinner at the kitchen table. She brought a card. Inside it, she had written 4 words beneath the printed message, in her clean and deliberate handwriting. "Still no gap, Dad." Gregory put the card on the refrigerator with a magnet. It is still there. Steve Harvey talked about this episode during a commencement address at a university in Atlanta 6 months after it aired. He did not talk about it as a television moment. He talked about it as the clearest illustration he had ever encountered of a principle he believed in but rarely saw demonstrated so precisely, that love is not passive, that the people who receive extraordinary devotion over the course of their lives do not simply absorb it. They study it, they internalize it, and eventually, when they have found the right form and the right moment, they reflect it back with interest and with evidence. KYRA Allen, he told the graduates, did not walk into that studio to be on television. She walked in to close a loop her father had been holding open for 22 years, afraid to look at too closely. She brought 14 women in a bound volume and a first paragraph she knew would break him. And she handed the whole thing to a game show host and said, "Please tell my father that he was enough." He paused for a moment. That is what children do with love when love is given R. They don't waste it. They figure out how to hand it back.